episode is brought to you by the Consultancy Growth Network. As you'll know, I'm a big believer in learning from people who've achieved the things that you want to. It's why I run this podcast, to share the stories of consulting leaders and how they've got to where they are today. So when I started talking to Mark Jansen and the team at Consultancy Growth Network, it was clear there was an obvious fit between Climate Consulting and their mission and what they are building with their network. But you're probably asking, what is the Consultancy Growth Network? The Consultancy Growth Network is the leading community of boutique consulting leaders. It brings together seasoned consulting growth experts who successfully scaled their own boutiques, with rapidly growing consulting founders looking to emulate their success. Now, you might be thinking, who are these growth experts? What do they actually know about consulting? And this is one of the most exciting things that personally I find about the network. The team at the Consultancy Growth Network have searched far and wide for some of the best boutique consulting leaders to help their members on their journeys, some of which I have previously interviewed for this podcast, such as Don Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo. But it's not just the insights from these people that you will benefit from. By joining, you get access to their jam-packed calendar of regular in-person and online events, their comprehensive growth hub of resources, and their active Slack community. Through all of these channels, you can learn, solve challenges, and achieve the goals you want for your firm. And now, if that wasn't enough reason to sign up, the Consultancy Growth Network is giving all listeners to this podcast a special sign-up offer. If you join for 12 months, you join for that next year, you will get your 13th month for free, giving you that extra month to continue to build on everything you're learning and continue to benefit from the network. To sign up, just visit consultancygrowthnetwork.com or contact their partnerships director, Luke at consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And when you're talking about joining, mention Create Engage or Climate Consulting, and you will get that special sign-up offer.
Today, then, we are joined by, and I'd like to invite Ravi to the stage. So Ravi is a partner at Growth Capital Partners, member of their investment team. Ravi, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for making the time for this. I don't want to take too much of your thunder, though. Do you want to give everyone on this call a bit more on your background and a bit more on who GCP are and why they might be interested in what you have to share?
Yeah, no problem at all. First of all, thank you very much for having me on, Nick. Great to see you again. Yeah, so my name is Ravi Monteiro. I'm a partner at GCP, Growth Capital Partners. So I've spent my entire career working with owner-managers of fast growth businesses. So the first half of my career was on the advisory side of the table, so working with entrepreneurs to help them either raise capital from private equity or sell their businesses to strategic acquirers. And then over the last 13 years or so, it's been on the investment side of the table with GCP. So that was a very natural transition for me, operating very much in the same ecosystem, working with those entrepreneurs, those owner managers, but instead of advising them, actually making the investments, working with them to really scale the businesses, and with the overall goal of building something of real strategic value. Just briefly from a GCP perspective, we're a private equity firm. We've got a 26-year track record of investing in fast growth owner-managed businesses operating across the knowledge economy. So, what does that mean? What do we mean by knowledge economy? For us, that's typically, intellectual capital-led businesses, asset light, delivering high margin, high quality services, typically people-centric and sort of underpinned by real subject matter expertise, delivering those sorts of services. So probably like a lot of the listeners here today. So typically, from our perspective, that covers specialist consultancies, specialist services, technology businesses operating across really interesting end markets with growth supported by global megatrends.
Fantastic. Well, I think a really, really helpful overview, Ravi, and clearly tons that you'll be able to share with our audience. Now, two small pieces for our audience before we dive in. The first is just so Ravi and I have context. I'm just going to launch a short poll. This will just give us a sense of who's in the room. It also will give us a sense of where we should focus today, because this session is for you. Ravi and I have three core areas that we are going to cover. What is going to help us is if we know that most of this room has a real priority with one or t'other, we will just focus our time more so. So that questionnaire is just opened. You should have it pop up on your screen. And then the other key thing is Ravi is giving his time, and Ravi does not do many of these sessions. And so this is hugely valuable for you to ask your questions that matter for your business to Ravi. You have the Q&A. Please put your questions in as we go. We will have time at the end. Equally, if there are questions that are pertinent as we go, we'll bring those in. So it will be a judgment call depending on where the conversation is. If actually it's something that will add to the whole room, we'll ask it in the session. If it's something that's more specific to your firm, we'll ask towards the end. And obviously, Ravi has context on who's in this room and those questions. So if we don't get to your question, Ravi will have that detail, and between you and him can follow up afterwards. So that is the context. Ravi, we've got answers coming in. So got an interesting mix in the audience. This is just to help you. So around 25% of our audience are in a kind of 20 to 50 person firm. We've got another 25 who are 50 plus. Most of those are in the 50 to 100. We've got some who are in the kind of 150 plus. And then interestingly, our first topic, branding positioning, seems to be a 6 or 7 for most people. Interestingly, people and talent is actually looking like it's ranking a bit higher. And Ravi, you'll be able to tell me how much of this is what people think versus what you see for the firms you invest in. And then growth strategy, interestingly, again, sort of around the 6, 7, I'd say my quick math says about 50% of our audience are putting themselves below a 6. So I think you're going to be able to add tons of value there. And interestingly, we've got about 35% who are looking at PE in the next 24 months. So I think some really interesting data points there. Thank you, everyone, for filling that out. I think then, Ravi, why don't we dive into that first topic? So positioning. And I'd love to know when GCP look at a knowledge economy business, how do you think about positioning? What does it mean to you? And why does it matter? Because most people think numbers in PE. They don't think the fluffy stuff.
Yeah. And I sort of touched on it in my introduction a bit, but, core focus for us whenever we're looking at any new investment opportunity is, can we work with the management team to build something of real strategic value to either the next investor or the next sort of strategic acquirer? And, with that in mind, whenever we go through a new investment process, it's really important from our perspective to get clear view, clear alignment with the management team that we're backing around what it is that we're trying to build, what it is that this business is going to be famous for today and over the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years. That's a lens that we put on our own business. So from our perspective, it's all about being the leading partnership investor to organizations operating across the knowledge economy. And therefore, it's a lens that we very much put on the new investments that we make as well. And I think about why do we do that? Why is it important? It's 2 real benefits for me. I think, first of all, it provides a very useful framework to make decisions, key decisions through the life of the investment. Whenever you've got a big, fork in the road, a big decision to make, does doing this thing, whatever it might be, does it move us forwards? Does it move us towards what it is that we are trying to build? So, if you're thinking about where you're going to place a bet, what are you going to do? What are you not going to do? It's, am I going to get closer to what it is that I'm trying to build and what's going to make this business, incredibly strategically valuable? It can apply to anything: key hires, M&A, moving into new markets, expanding out your proposition. Is it answering the question around sort of what it is we're famous for and what it is that we're trying to build? That then links very much into the second key point for me, which is almost around what the next event looks like, whether it is raising private equity next time around, whether it is selling to a strategic acquirer. They're far more likely to be able to see, to be able to articulate, to be able to wrap their heads around what it is that makes this business so strategically valuable if they understand those drivers and what, where it sits almost within their organization and what makes it special.
And I think it's a fascinating area. And almost to your last point, I'd be really interested, how do you do that 3 or 5 years out? Because to your point, there will be firms that you've just invested in one and you're thinking to that time horizon. People on this call are probably thinking the world moves so fast, Ravi. I mean, ChatGPT is less than 5 years old, I want to say. And I am, is one example. But how do you place those bets? Because that obviously, to your point, informs the rest of the strategy.
Yeah, 100%. And for me, it's keeping that framework in mind. Where's the business today? Where's it going to get to over the next 3, 4, 5 years? And what are the building blocks that we need to put in place to be able to achieve that? I think a key point for me, to your point there around it's a fast moving world, you have to constantly horizon scan. You have to constantly stay ahead of the market and think, where's spend going now, or where are the strategic acquirers looking to place their bets, and making sure that whatever you do, whatever you're building remains relevant to sort of that end market. Clearly, with any strategy, with any proposition, you need to be committed to it. You need to deliver it but you absolutely have to keep that one eye on the broader market backdrop to make sure that you're building something that people are going to value and going to want to need.
Yeah. And I realize we've dived into this, and I think we know what it means, but I actually almost, this is a question I probably should have asked at the start, Ravi. To you as an investor, when you say positioning, uh, what does that look like to you? And I only ask that, yeah, I'm a marketer. Some might think positioning means, well, we change our website. So a PE firm just wants to see a new website. What does it actually mean to you?
For me, it's what is your proposition? What are you famous for? What are you doing for who and why? And I think the why piece is really important because that's what ultimately gives you the defensibility to protect what it is that you are doing and sort of really create that value.
I'd love to dig into the why. And I don't know, is there an example you can give from your portfolio of where that why has really helped drive that positioning?
Yeah. So one of our recent exits is actually a business called Bridewell. So it's a cybersecurity consulting and managed services business. We invested in it in 2021 and we exited last year. It was a very successful exit for us. It was a very successful exit for the management team. And with that one, when I talk about what it is that you're trying to build, when we went through that investment process, we were able to get really clear alignment with the team around what this business needed to look like in 4 or 5 years' time. And for us, that North Star almost was to build the UK's leading cybersecurity services company, selling into organizations operating across critical national infrastructure, CNI, or other regulated industry. So what we had was real clarity on what it is that we were doing, real clarity on who we were doing it for. And as I said there, the real clarity on the why. And the why in that situation was essentially those CNI or regulated industry organizations, for them, the cyber, the IT, the systems was the crown jewels, were the crown jewels. So for them, it was all about having the highest quality service providers, the most technical specialists, the people that would keep their organizations safe. It was not about finding the cheapest provider who could just tick a box for them and something they don't need to think about. So what that meant was every time that we were going to try and win, new pieces of business or whatever, it was about demonstrating those, the softer pieces, the technical capabilities, the how we work with clients, rather than we'll do this for the cheapest cost view. And that really supported our growth. It really supported our margins, and it really supported that overall positioning. If I link that back to my two other points earlier, then around the building out the frameworks, the framework decision making, and the exit piece, every single key decision that we made on the life of that investment linked back to, are we contributing to what we're trying to build? So leadership, for example, when we invested in that business, it was, as with a lot of the businesses that we invest in, it was founder owned. You had two co-founders who pretty much wore every hat there was to wear in the business, from sales, operations, delivery, finance, and, all of them. And, a key part for us over that investment process was to, how do you take those hats off them and surround them with good people at that senior sort of leadership team and the next tier down. So for example, when we brought a CCO in to sort of drive the go-to-market piece, for us, it was imperative that it was someone that was steeped in cybersecurity and CNI. So, we found a great person there. Actually, he'd worked in organizations like Thales, BAE Systems, exactly the types of organizations, and someone that could absolutely build the commercial function for us. If I then link that into, what does that mean from the commercial function perspective? Our go-to-market strategy was built purely around CNI organizations. So how do we target airports? How do we target energy companies, utility companies, etc., and build sort of the campaigns, the messaging all around where their pain points were? I guess as importantly with what we were doing, it also was a driver of what we weren't going to do as well. And actually finding, not chasing every piece of business for the sake of growing the top line, having the confidence to say no, recognizing that not every pound's a good pound because it would move us further away from what it was that we were trying to build ultimately. And I guess that then linked into my second point around what it meant for exit. We were so clear in terms of what the strategy was and what we were trying to build that it meant both private equity and trade bidders that were looking at the business just understood it and ascribed so much strategic value to it. final point linked to that is it wasn't just words. So we had data to back up and prove out that story. And, from the top of my head is, going back a year or so now, but, I think about 85 to 90% of our revenue when we exited was to CNI organizations. And that really sort of came through in the exit process.
I really hope you are enjoying today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you want to get ahead, you want to move your consultancy, your career forward, and you want to learn even more, then I would definitely recommend checking out our brand new marketing-focused podcast, Brand and Deliver. In this series, we dive in to the best, the latest, the newest in consulting marketing and professional services marketing at large to help you get the edge in your firm. If you go to your podcast app, type in Brand and Deliver, it'll be there. Or go to our website to podcast and you can find it there and click your favorite episode. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, I think a great example, Ravi. And actually, I'm going to hold on. I really want to come back to that commercial piece, which I know we're going to talk more about, kind of growth towards the end. So I might hold on that just because you touched on one of the other key topics, and it's a nice segue in people. And I think people and hiring is, it's a challenge for all consultancies and knowledge economy businesses. I've seen so many, hires work as haven't. And I think you gave a great example there of how the positioning informs this. I'll ask the broad question and you can narrow it as works best for our audience is how do you mentioned there, you acquire a business or you acquire an interest in a business. How do you approach building that hiring plan to drive scale? Because you've had some phenomenally successful scaling journeys. How do you build the underpinnings from a people perspective?
Yeah, and Bridal again is a good example. I think when we invested, there was probably about 75 people in that business, and there were sort of north of 350 by the time we exited. So getting the people strategy right was absolutely fundamental. I guess first and foremost, you have to marry up the supply and the demand piece to make sure that you're recruiting at the right sort of cadence whereby you can satisfy demand, get on the pitch with clients in the right sort of framework and not sort of in the right sort of timing and not sort of slow them down, but equally not building a huge costly bench that you then sort of can't clear. So having that constant tension between supply and demand is massively important. I think the starting point in a number of the businesses that we invest in is always that it links back to what it is that you're trying to build essentially. So what is the current skills and capabilities matrix? What does it need to look like, both to satisfy that sort of near-term demand, but also in terms of where you're trying to get the business to, and then where are the gaps, and how do you fill that? And then from there, it really is about people, systems, and processes. So we will often work with businesses that we back to help them build an internal recruitment function, and that's getting 2, 3, 4, whatever the right number of people in the business who's sold almost a recruitment agency in-house, and their job is to go out, profile the market, make sure that they've got a warm pipeline of people that have been properly qualified, that are there and ready, available to join the business as and when required, so that you can control that cadence and sort of flex it in line with demand. One of the other tools that we have worked with businesses multiple times is around sort of building academies, and so actually building in-house a way for them to get either new graduates, career changes, people that you want to sort of get in, train up in the ways of working of your business. And I think the benefits for me are multiple fold really. One is it allows you to access other pockets of talent, particularly in markets where talent might be scarce. I think you're able to really sort of sheep dip those people in your culture and your ways of working. And we all know the importance in consultancies and people business of sort of maintaining that culture as the business scales. And then that sort of links on to the next point, which is loyalty. You've brought those people either in from different careers, or you've given them the first start, you've trained them up. It does really sort of drive that loyalty and support with retention metrics and whatnot.
Wow. I think some great areas, Ravi, also because I'm always interested to pick into the areas that seem slightly contrarian. And I think a couple of bits in there. I'll start with the academy. I want to come to senior hires shortly, but just that academy piece, again, you've done a lot more of this more successfully than I have. I have often heard consultants say, we've got to find someone who's done this exact role. We need someone at this level, they must have done this. And so your point on academies is really interesting, because if I was thinking we need to grow really quickly, I would say, well, we've got to find 50 people who've done this exact job. You've clearly seen success the other way. for our audience, almost why has that approach worked? How do you make it successful? And what are the sort of secret sauce in what you look for? Like what, is it graduates? Is it military leavers? What makes that a success?
In terms of what makes it a success, it is getting access to the right pools of people, and it could be, Bridal was a really good example for the military point, because there is quite a good overlap between military and cybersecurity. So that was quite a natural piece. But equally, we were working with local universities, local colleges. It's about finding the right, the people with the right attitudes and the right mindsets that you can get in and sort of train properly and bring through the organization. I think to make it work, and to your point around, is it people that are a finished article versus people that are almost step up candidates to grow into it? That's about getting the right systems, the right structures around, so that they have the structure to be able to grow themselves. A lot of the time, the way that we did it with Bridal, actually you'd have people from the academy coming to shadow people that were working with clients. So the first month, they wouldn't be billed out essentially, but they'd be learning the ways of working. They'd be learning how to deliver, and it makes them, that sort of on the job experience helps them when they move on to the next thing to be, much further up the learning curve.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and just that early investment. And you touched on that you hired a chief commercial officer for that business. And if this is the best example, use it. And if there's others, great. I would say, from just people I know in the industry and what I see, senior hires succeed probably as much as they fail in our industry. And I'd almost bet probably succeed less. You'll have stats on this. How do you manage that recruitment through to onboarding to ensure a senior hire succeed? Because in your world, time's important. They've got to succeed.
Yeah, and it is one of the hardest things to get right as well. And I made the point earlier that we invest in founder and run businesses, and more often than not, the founders are the business to a certain extent. They are wearing all those different hats, and they're driving the culture, and it's their ethos that's getting pushed across the organization. So you do have it. It is very often the first 3 to 6 months of any investment. It's figuring out which hats they're wearing, how you take them off them, where you need them to be spending their time and focusing. And more often than not, that's trying to get them more pointed at strategic stuff rather than a lot of the minutiae of running every single different function. The only way that that's going to work, to your point, is getting the right people in and around them. I think for me, there's a couple of key learnings that I've had over recent years. One is prioritization and phasing properly. So you don't, in any example, there could, you may need to bring in a CFO, you may need to bring in a COO, you may need to bring in a CCO, you may need to bring in all of the above. But if you bring them all at the same time, you can quite quickly get indigestion and lose some of that sort of cultural glue that sort of binds the organization together. So getting the prioritization right, where do you want to focus first, second, and phasing it, I think is massively important. I think the other piece for me is, and this is not necessarily about it happens to be the finished article, but it's looking for people with experience at the same stage of the journey that you're about to embark upon, because there are right people for different stages of a business's growth. And you might have the most polished professional person from the corporate world who's, fantastic and can brilliantly grow businesses that are 300 million revenue plus, but are they going to be the same in a 15 or 20 million revenue business? So matching those sort of experiences and skill sets, I think, is massively important. And then the final piece is pretty obvious. We've touched on culture a few times, but that cultural fit is so important in scale up and growth businesses. Can you find the right people that will help to progress and develop the business whilst protecting and even enhancing what makes it so special in the first place? Because if you get that piece wrong, that can erode value pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, some great points. I love your point around indigestion, Ravi, because yes, I think as founders, it's very easy to try and do everything at once. And I think particularly when it comes to the world of product, people hear things and think, well, if I do it all, I will get there quicker. And I think what you're saying really eloquently is actually identify where you need, stage it so that you are bringing people on in a way that works for the rest of the business. Because so often we'll forget, to your point of culture, actually there's a whole business they have to plug into. So I think some really good advice. I will jump. We had a couple of questions in. I just talk on this topic, so I'd be interested if you have any thoughts on them. I'll wrap them together and you can pull them apart. One is around recruitment team, one is around execs. The recruitment one is, when should you be building an internal team versus using external recruitment agencies? And is there a rule of thumb or guide? And then the other question is, do you have any thoughts on fractional executives versus hires? Again, you might not, but I thought both of those would be interesting to touch on now.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the first one, it all depends on your growth plan and the cadence that you're looking to recruit at. If it's a hire a month, a hire every couple of months, you probably don't need the investment of an in-house recruitment function. If it's a business that you're looking to add 4, 5, 10 new people per month, then I think there's a big advantage of building your own recruitment from so again, and it's only because we've been talking about it to mention the Bridewell example. At a point, we were adding 10 new people per month into that business, and we had a team of 3 recruiters that were doing that.
Wow.
I think having those people that know your business, are embedded in your business, are able to go out to market and build those relationships from that sort of internal position, I think is massively helpful. If the frequency is less than that, you clearly don't need to sort of have that sort of investment.
Fantastic. And then just to the other side, any thoughts on, we've actually now had 2 questions on the use of fractional execs. Do you have a rule of thumb? Is there a guide? What's your take? How have you seen that at GCP?
Yeah. And again, always have their place. From our perspective in the businesses that we invest, maybe I should have said this at the outset. So for us, we typically invest in businesses making somewhere between 2 and 10 million EBITDA. And we look to sort of double plus that over the course of our investment. And when we go into a new investment, a new partnership with a business, what we're looking to put in place is almost what we call a succession ready board. So what is that board? What's that senior leadership team going to look like in 3, 4, 5 years time that's going to take the business on the next stage of its journey? So I guess with that lens on it, we focus less, frankly, on fractional, because I think for us it's important to have that cohesion in the senior team and then working together for a number of years before they go on whatever the next stage of that journey is. But I have absolutely seen fractional work well in different functions. Marketing, we've certainly seen that a number of times. People, not being of the scale to sort of have their own, again, investment in an all singing, all dancing marketing function, either working with great sort of organizations like yourself or having that sort of fractional capability in-house can work as well, but it is less of a focus for us.
No, I think really helpful. And I think, Ravi, a lot of this comes back to, and it's something that's coming really clear through what you're highlighting, is you've got to start with that end in mind. And to your point of that exit ready board, which I like the phrase, is I'm hearing from you is, well, we've got this event, let's get everything in place so we're not guessing at the last minute or trying to, rally to find people at the 11th hour. And I think probably actually takes us to a nice piece on growth. And I know we're moving at a canter. I want to make sure we've covered everything and our audience have time for questions at the end. And again, to everyone watching, please keep putting your questions. Those last 2 were very much from yourselves. And the more we have backlog, the more we've got straight for Ravi to go into. And I'd love to turn to growth. And I'm actually, I want to start on the organic side, because this is something, Ravi, we touched on ahead of this session. GCP as a private equity house typically lean into organic growth. I know you have some inorganic, and we'll touch on that. But it was something that struck me with what you said earlier around the fact that in the Bridewell example, everything focused in, and you mentioned 95% of your book came from just that revenue, the industry you wanted to work with. And I share this because I, like you, speak to consulting leaders day in, day out. And I've lost count of the amount of firms who have added business units in different, verticals or horizontals and or different offerings. There was a phase where every consultancy wanted a SaaS product. I would love to almost get your take. If it sounds like, I'm not going to say you do the opposite, that sounds too extreme, but you focus. Why focus? And for anyone here who's like, I've got 10 business units, Ravi, why might they not want that at this size?
I think there's probably a couple of points there. One is just a scale point. So if you're at the size of organization that we typically invest in, and you've got 20 different business units doing 20 different things, any single one of those pieces are probably going to be relatively subscale, first of all. And if you think about an investor or a strategic acquirer, none of those, well, first of all, it's going to be probably too diverse to fit into exactly what it is that they're looking for at that point in time. But equally, any one of those individual sort of units probably aren't going to have the scale to move the needle for them and to really sort of make a difference. The piece for me around focus and specialism, and you can certainly get to focus and specialism by having different business units doing different things if that's where they focus. The bit for me on why the businesses that we invest in really do focus and specialize, sort of comes back to right to win for us. And, if I think about the last 3 or 4 years, we've all been operating in a pretty challenging market backdrop, lower growth, inflation, higher interest rates, macroeconomic uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, wars. All of that uncertainty has led to sort of squeezed budgets, also a bit of a vacuum around sort of leadership in terms of signing off decision making, where to spend, where to place bets, to borrow your term. The flip side to that is all of that uncertainty also brings a lot of opportunity for consulting businesses, because organizations will need specialists to help them navigate uncertainty, to help them deliver transformation, but they need a reason to buy from a certain organization. And that can be deep sector expertise, it can be deep technical capability, it can be unparalleled sort of understanding of certain tech ecosystem. It could be a unique or differentiated way of working with clients and your delivery model. But there's a hook, there's a reason why people think, well, that's the one that I want to buy, and that's that's who I'm going to partner with to sort of drive me forward. I think where you spread yourself too thin and arguably become a slightly more generic consultancy, perhaps, or trying to be all things to all people, it's quite hard to demonstrate that piece around what makes you special. I think you can get found out quite quickly, and that genuine reason to purchase moves away from being something around what you do or how you do it. It probably comes down to price, and that's where you sort of start to get into a part of the market that you may not want to be.
I think a really helpful answer, and your last piece of ultimately you can charge more because you're more valuable. I think really hits home, and hopefully for our audience, there will be people who have that former strategy. They're now going to have your latter. We've actually got lots of questions on this, but I'm going to come. There's some that I think are going to be really fun for us to answer, but I'm going to come back to those just because they are so specific. But to the people who've shared them, thank you. We've got some great questions for you, Ravi, that are going to get into numbers. But the thing I'd love to then turn to, because again, I understand you're broadly an organic house, and we actually, Ravi, did not recognize the fact you grew that business to 400 people in, I'd say, the toughest consulting market I've known, and I've not seen many of them. So everyone will want to know how you did that. But I think one of the areas I was interested to turn to was acquisition, because again, in consulting, everyone talks about acquiring, bolting on, all of these terms. I would love to understand how you as a house approach acquisition, when not, how do you make it successful where you do?
Yeah. And we do primarily back organic led plans, but we absolutely see the value of acquisitions when done right, in terms of sort of getting you to the answer quicker, or really sort of building that strategic value. And I guess there's a couple of scenarios where it works really well. What one is accelerating growth. The other is sort of really helping to build out that business shape and get you to what it is that you're trying to build. So I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but it's having in mind where it is you're trying to get to, and does whatever M&A acquisitions that you're going to do, does it support you with that? For us, it's never about acquiring scale for the sake of acquiring scale if it doesn't fit into what you're trying to build, because that is a pretty quick way to erode value.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt too much, but I think what you've just said is going to be really important. Could you just define that for our audience who may not be as familiar? What does scale for scale's sake mean?
Buying revenue. Buying, because, and certainly, again, I touched before about the fact that, it's been a tougher backdrop over the last few years. Growth's been harder to come by. It is very easy to say, well, let's just buy something and boost our growth rate, and that'll make us look great and all the rest of it. There's definitely a place for that, as long as it fits within the strategy of what you are trying to build. And it's so it either brings you something, it brings you scale in the right places in where the business is at the moment, or it helps you building out that shape in terms of what it is that you're trying to build. So I guess example again, because we've talked about it, Bridal was predominantly organic led, but we did do an acquisition probably 12 months before exiting. The piece there was, back to what was our North Star, building the UK's leading cyber services provider into CNI. We made fantastic traction across energy, water, airports. The one area where organically we were not moving at the pace, we're not getting the traction that we wanted to, was public sector. And, we sat down as a team and said, well, look, if we're going to be going to market ourselves in the next 9, 12, 18 months, and we're talking about being the UK's leading CNI provider, but we don't have a public sector story, that's a problem, and that puts a hole in the story of what it is that we're trying to build. So at that point, that's when we went out, mapped the market, identified different cybersecurity, consultancy, and managed services businesses operating within the public sector. Found one that was a fantastic overlap in terms of the skill sets, what they were doing, but had really made the model work with a number of public sector clients, had great relationships there, had long-term contracts. The cultural fit of the two businesses was incredibly strong as well. So it was a very natural home for the business. And now I think that one, it was, again, when we exited that business, we were making probably 40 million plus of revenue. That acquisition was probably 5 or 6 of revenue. So it wasn't huge in the scheme of the overall business, but what it meant for the overall shape, CNI story, etc., was incredibly powerful and just really built out that business shape point for us.
If you are enjoying today's episode, I would love to hear your thoughts. We thrive on feedback, and it would mean so much to me if you could take 10 seconds to go to your podcast app, leave us a review, and let me know how we are doing. Let me know what this podcast is doing for you. Let me know what you would like us to see, what guest you would like to hear from next. Your feedback helps us make this podcast better for you and for all of our other listeners. Thank you in advance. And now let's get back to the show.
No, I think a brilliant example. And I love, and you brought it to life perfectly. That story and the power of the why of the acquisition. To your point, not just scale for scale's sake, really comes through. I'm now, Ravi, because we're getting in questions that I think will bring all of this to life, and I want to make sure we give our audience time. I think thank you so much for everything you've covered so far. I'm now going to throw the questions. I will, and these are in no particular order, but thank you, everyone. First one, you will need a pencil for, just because I've got some numbers at you, Ravi, and don't worry, there's not a sum at the end of this. But context here, we've got someone in the audience doing 10 million top line, 3 million EBIT. They've got 50-50 split US and rest of the world revenue. And here comes the questions. They have a contractor base, so 75% of the team's contractor, 25% is employee. And I'll ask both, they're kind of two parts, but is the contractor base a challenge on that? Is that resource mix a challenge? And then is there any thoughts on the global split? We've actually had another question on global split as well in terms of exit. Does that I've thrown a lot at you there, but do those two questions make sense?
Yeah, they do. I think the contractor perm split is an interesting one, and something that we always debate here as well, because I think the contractor model is, it is, and when done right, can be very valuable because it gives you access to talent. It gives you access to a range of different skill sets that you might not necessarily need to have in-house all the time. It also gives you flexibility in a time when the market is tougher than it may have been sort of 3 or 4 years ago, so that you can scale up and scale down quickly. I think the thing to bear in mind there comes back to, depending on whether you're looking at private equity or whether you're looking at trade next, what is it that you will be selling at that point? Because the secret sauce may be the way that you manage that network and are able to access people very quickly. But if you're sort of trying to sell deep capabilities, then it's perhaps harder to do that if it's not something that you've got in-house, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think great answer. Comes back to story, feels like the key point. And then just to the other side, we've had 2 questions on this, so I'm keen to hear your thoughts. So the second half of this person's question was just, for context, 50% of revenues US, 50% rest of the world. This will apply anywhere, I guess. We've had a second one on it. We think we should be sold to a US trade buyer as we can bring them rest of the world business. So it's specific to them, but if you can answer there, broaden it out. How do you think about global revenue mix in terms of that exit story?
Yeah, and again, it comes back to what it is you're trying to build. So if you're trying to sell to US trade or private equity, having that footprint and the majority of the business over there is going to be interesting to them. If they're then organizations that are looking for a springboard into other geographies, the fact that 50% of the revenue has access to that, I think is really interesting for them as well. Again, sort of echoing a point that I made earlier, just making sure that there's enough scale in it. If that 50% rest of the world is spread across 50 countries, that's sort of different to a bit more critical mass in 2 or 3 places that might be really strategically valuable to an acquirer.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I ask this being very fine if there is not a rule of thumb, but do you have a rule of thumb on what are like a substantial enough amount of revenue, be it a geography or be it a horizontal or a vertical, is to to be substantive? To your point, is it people should be aiming for 5 million per thing, 10 million? It might not be that simple, but I've asked the audience.
I don't think it is that. I think it depends on where you are in your evolution, your life cycle, and what it is that you're trying to sell. If you are trying to sell a strong US story and US is 5 to 10% of your revenue, it's hard to do that. If you are trying to sell, look, we have got great market position within the UK. We've dipped our toe in the water of the US to prove that it works. And there we've got 5 or 10%. That's a completely different, it's a completely different sell at that point. And again, Bridewell was similar. We actually looked at acquisitions in the US previously, but couldn't find the right thing that was either the right skill set, the right customer base, the right cultural fit. So we ended up doing that organically. And by the time we sort of exited, there were probably 5 people in the US, and it probably was 5 or 6% of revenue. But the story on that one was never, we're selling you the US dream. It's, we've got such a strong position in UK, broadening out into Europe, and there's a the next part of the plan shows that we can take the US because we've already proven it out. We've got a bunch of clients, but what it needs now is investment behind it to drive down the next 3 or 4 years.
Brilliant. No, thank you for that. So next one, and again, a few bits of context, and I'll actually pretty much read it as it's written. So how and where have you seen a consultancy pivot to a new technology? And the example here is, i.e. from consulting, delivery, and support around one platform. So for instance, SAP, in this case, the person said from SAP to Shopify. And to the person who's asked the question, if that's material, let me know. Like, we have clients who work in SAP. If it was SAP to Oracle, I'd get it. I'm not sure how Shopify plays there, but if it's material, ask Ravi. For you, pivoting from one to t'other, what have they done? And the main question is, how much did they invest up front before winning that first deal? So I guess if you're going to pivot tech, how have you seen that work? Have you seen it work? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so we invested in a business called Ubiquity. We invested in that business probably 3 or 4 years ago. And when we invested, it was a intelligent automation business partnering predominantly with tech businesses like UiPath, Blue Prism. Again, the investment thesis there was an interesting part of the business, but it was moving more towards sort of AI driven strategies, working with different vendors, Microsoft predominantly. And that is a business now that is, whereas previously it was probably 60 or 70% Blue Prism and UiPath, it's probably more than that. Microsoft focus now, working with them much more of an AI lens than sort of intelligent automation, and really working with organizations to drive their sort of AI strategy as well. A big part of the investment there was in the Microsoft partnership. So getting people that understand Microsoft, understand how it works as an organization, understand how it works with different partners, to make sure that we could, when we talk about partnership, we talk about the win-win-win. What's the win for the partners, Microsoft, what's the win for the client, and what's the win for us? Because if you can demonstrate that to the organization that you're working with, that's where you start to really sort of get traction, really with the partner as well, and getting leads, getting introduced to the right situations.
Fantastic. And just in the Ubiquity example, if you can share, because I think it will really help this person, but generally is that partnership was the first step. And then do you have thoughts on, do you go to market? So again, oversimplifying, like, do you put out your new websites or Microsoft and then you backfill with sell? Do you win a couple of key clients and then pivot the marketing slowly? Because I'm sure there's people here thinking, I don't want to, bite the hand that feeds while I'm trying to get the new hand feeding.
Yeah, I think getting that balance right is absolutely right, because you don't want to alienate either your existing partners, you don't want to alienate existing customers. You want to make sure you get that balance right so that you can drive another growth opportunity whilst not sort of alienating the ones that have served you well so far.
Fantastic. Also, you've got an email from someone who has some potential bolt-ons for you. So you don't have to talk about that now, but marketing works. And for everyone else on the webinar, my little advert, marketing works. So back to that. And actually, Ravi, it is a marketing question. We've got one of our audience. When Ravi and his team invest in businesses where your investment thesis highlights a need for building, strengthening, shifting, positioning of the brand with a capital B here. And this ties a little to this is probably a worked example of what you shared earlier. Do you normally rely on bringing in a head of marketing or a marketing hire? Do you take a different approach? I guess the question is, if this person's trying to build that brand, how would you do that?
Yeah, so I think strategic marketing is massively important when you think about how you're positioning your business, what your go-to-market strategy looks like, how do you access the right customers in the right areas. So bringing a CMO in is often one of the senior hires that we look to bring into the business. I'm not sure if this is answering the exact question, but we will also, if we are doing some strategic work around branding, we will often work with an agency as well who's out there, understands the market, understands what resonates with different customers, different customer groups, to really support with the brand building part of it. And that could be a rebrand, it could be a brand refresh. I think working with experts to help us do that, is often a core part of the value creation.
Fantastic. No, I think really helpful answer. I've got one here actually, Ravi, and it links to something I wish I'd asked you. So I'm going to ask it. And that is, you see hundreds of businesses. I know we spoke about it. You see hundreds, you invest in single digits. It's very specific. So I'll ask the specific, you can run it as the specific is what stands out to you in the decks of the businesses the investment decks that you say, let's actually have a chat with them. Please do answer that. But if there's a much broader, like what stands out full stop, it'd be great to know.
One is the market. What's the market opportunity? Is the market going to help over the next 3, 4, 5 years of an investment? 2, how is the business then positioned to benefit from that and drive that? And a lot of that does come back to that specialism, right to win. Why are people going to keep buying them? Why is it going to be strategically valuable? And then the third piece, which you can't get from a deck, and actually you often can't get those 2 bits from a deck, because meeting the team, meeting the people that are driving that, that's what brings it to life. So that was my third point. It's the management team and the people that you're going to be working with and really sort of driving that, alongside you over the next few years is absolutely key for me. So that's very helpful, and it's good to sort of get the information there, having them sort of very clearly articulating what the opportunity is and why you're the business to sort of drive that is great. But getting in front of people, the chemistry, the cultural fit, all of that is massively important. Can you work together as partners? But, is it a team that you want to work with, you want to back? And equally, are you an investor that they want to work with as well?
I think great answers. And I'm actually just to your third one that clearly is important for you. When you go to meet management teams, what are you looking for? If someone's watching this thinking, I want to audit my own team or myself as the founder, what are you looking for in those teams that you invest in?
It's vision and strategic clarity. And then it's the ability to execute on that. And that doesn't necessarily mean being able to do it all yourself, but it's knowing where you need the help and the support and what it is that's going to get you from A to B, in the most efficient manner.
Brilliant. Another question, and this is an interesting one. And again, I'm sure you're wrestling with it. Traditional plans for PE and consulting have changed because of AI. Marketing is a prime example, along with traditional roles, but also wider operating models. In effect, Ravi, how are you seeing AI change the world that we all operate in, and how does it change, to your point, when you look 5 years forward, the landscape you're selling into?
Yeah, massively relevant, massively topical, something that we're thinking about in all the portfolio businesses we're invested in, all the new opportunities that we see. I think a lot of it comes back to what we talked about earlier in terms of that skills matrix, skills and capabilities matrix, because I think in consultancies where you've got proper subject matter expertise, that's not, the need for that isn't going to disappear, but perhaps the way of getting that to market might disappear. So it might be, where you're using AI to do perhaps some of the more lower level stuff to get you to the answer more quickly, where people are engaging with consultants and subject matter experts. They want that human in the loop. They want that that expert, that person to sort of be able to amalgamate everything that's coming together and deliver that service for them. So I think what we'll see over the next 6, 9, 12 months and beyond is a change in sort of that skills matrix and what's important to organization, but it's not going to sort of disappear at all. But that brings loads of opportunity with it as well. So again, people-centric businesses will remain massively important, but there's probably an opportunity to sort of break the link between headcount growth and revenue growth. You can look at different pricing models, more fixed price engagements, more outcome-driven sort of engagements where you're using AI tools as, just part of your service delivery. You're not selling bodies to get to the answer. So, it can help. But perhaps you won't get as many people on the pitch, but you're pricing it in a different way. It might go to revenue, but it might give you an opportunity to enhance margins.
No, I think it's a great answer, and I guess talks to GCP's the knowledge economy. To your point, how much of AI is about bringing that knowledge and building what is it your clients need, not simply, to your point, bodies to get to the answer. So I think it's a great take. Ravi, I'm conscious of your time. Let me just see. I think we've pretty much drawn to the end of our audience's questions. So for anyone who is, sometimes people hold off out of politeness, please do throw in questions. I'm going to start wrapping now. If we get a last question, I might throw it at Ravi, but Ravi, I'm conscious you've got a busy afternoon ahead. So what I say is thank you so much for this. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd want to share with our audience? Is there anything that, if they were taking away from this, where should they be thinking about? What would you point them to and focus on?
Yeah, look, I think for me, it's think about where you are in your own journey and where it is that you want to get to. I think if you're thinking about either taking on investment or selling, for me, there's, I guess my one key point is that clarity around strategy, what it is you're trying to build. And, that might continue to evolve, but being able to sort of articulate that, I think, is massively important. And I think from there, it's thinking very carefully about what you might want from a partner, what it is that they can bring, and equally then spending meaningful time with those people, referencing them properly. I think it's so important. It's a two-way process. So it's so important to, for entrepreneurs or founders to make the right decision, the right call about who it is that they're going to work with, the right person to add value over the next stage of the journey, but equally the right person to have fun and sit across the board table from and be able to trust and make difficult decisions and share the successes. Life's too short to sort of work with people that you don't get along with and you're not going to sort of enjoy the journey. So I think that's that chemistry and fit is a hugely important part.
I think a great place for us to finish, Ravi. Well, thank you very much for giving your time today. As I say, I know you don't do very many of these, so I really appreciate it for myself, for my audience. I think I've got a ton. Nicely, we've got the recording, so we will, everyone, be sharing that with you. Obviously, you can listen back to all the key points. And Ravi, thank you very much, and all the best for the rest of your day.
Thanks very much, Nick.
Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And, I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.